Welcome to the Black Writer Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman. The Black Writer Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Crystal Wilkinson, a recent fellowship recipient of the Academy of American Poets, is the award-winning author of Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghosts, a culinary memoir, Perfect Black, a collection of poems, and 3 works of fiction, The Birds of Opulence, Water Street, and Blackberries, Blackberries. She is the recipient of an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Poetry, an O. Henry Prize, a USA Arts Fellowship, and an Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. Her second book, Water Street, was a finalist for the Orange Prize and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. She was Poet Laureate of Kentucky from 2021 to 2023. Crystal Wilkinson currently teaches creative writing at the University of Kentucky, where she is a Bush-Holbrook Endowed Professor. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with you because you have a longer history with the Hurston Wright Foundation than I do.
I do have one going way, way back.
Way, way back. And I know recently I got to lay my eyes on you in live time, still virtual, when you were part of the Gumbo celebration last year with
Yeah.
Marita Golden. And for those who aren't familiar with anything that I'm talking about, Gumbo was an anthology that was celebrating its 25th year, I believe, last year.
Mm-hmm.
Marita Golden, who was the co-founder of the Hurston Wright Foundation, and the art was the writer in residence for so many years, but really put together this anthology for many reasons. It was definitely a fundraiser for the organization, but it also was um, something that could our mission is to discover, mentor, and honor Black writers. And it definitely was something that was doing all of those things. I know some of the writers in there were contributing a piece for the first time to really be brought to a national stage. Some were mid-career. Where were you in your stage in your
I was
career?
one of those at the very beginning. Like I was so excited because she edited that with Elin Harris, and Elin was everywhere at the time. And I knew Marita's work too. So I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be in here. And even after all these years, like when Mitch showed up in that Zoom, I was like, are you in gumbo? So we were all, that was such a
Yeah, you're
wonderful
talking about
occasion.
Mitchell Jackson.
Yeah, Mitchell
Okay.
Jackson. So we all were like taking our gumbos out and looking through them again. And yeah, that was a real big highlight because, well, the Hurston Wright Foundation, period, because I was in that very first workshop
Really, as a
that they put
participant?
together as a participant.
I had no idea. I
Yeah.
see. I'm aware of you being a former instructor. You've won awards. You've really been in the mix, but I had no idea. So you say the very first workshop?
The very first workshop, the
Wow.
very first one, I saw an ad for it in Essence magazine. And
Wow.
I got my mother to keep my children. I was working for a small women's college here in Kentucky at the time. And so I actually, and I'm still shy, but I was super duper shy. And I got myself together and went and asked the president of that university
Wow.
if he could help pay for me to go. Once I got
Wow.
accepted, I was like, I've got to go to this thing.
The president. What the president,
President
not the dean or chair of your department, but the president.
went straight to the president. I
I
was
love
working in
that.
marketing at the time,
Okay.
and I said, I really want to do this. You don't know this about me, but I'm a writer. Other than just writing these news releases, I'm also working on my fiction, and this is a great opportunity. And He gave me the presidential hoopty, is what I call it. It's a big, huge Lincoln Continental that I got my mother to keep the kids.
Oh my goodness. So you
Gave
got a car too.
presidential hoopty and gave me money for the hotel, and it was such a wonderful week.
That is fantastic. Was it at a university or was it in a hotel?
It was in a university,
Okay.
but we stayed in a hotel, and it was at the very beginning. So there are stories to tell about the
Yes,
hotel.
yes. So that is another conversation that I would love to have with you. That's fantastic. And that is you are such, many people call themselves a storyteller. That is this is the Black Writer Studio. So many people are storytellers. You are a storyteller that uses so many different genres to tell these stories that are so engrossing. So when I read, so you currently have a book out now, Praise Song for the Kitchen's Ghosts: Stories and Recipes from Five Generations of Black Country Cooks. It is probably one of the most beautifully presented books that I've seen in a very long time, but it is so multi-genre in that it literally is a cookbook. It literally is a memoir.
Hmm.
It literally, and even I don't even know if it was intentional that even the way that you write your prose a lot of times is very poetic. And we know that are you still the Poet Laureate of Kentucky?
I just my reign ended at the beginning of 2024. So as of April, there's a new one. But yeah,
Wow. How long was your tenure in that role?
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are accomplished on so many levels and so many genres, and they have all come together in this really I think eclectic is that isn't even accurate.
I
It's
like the word eclectic though.
okay, because I've seen other books and I've interviewed other writers who have are starting to really present this multi-genre type of telling of stories, and I love it. I love this. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I love reading and seeing all of the visuals, but what is inherent in your work is that you are also educating. And even in your introduction, you talk about that what folks are most often, when we even think of Black people, they're most often um, used interchangeably, Black and urban.
Hmm.
But what you are bringing to the foreground is for us to see that no, there is a Black Appalachia and this culture is so rich and deep and ingrained in the fabric of what America is, and you're going to know exactly what it's about, and that is what you're telling through telling your story. So that was a lot. I said a lot to hone in. My first question is really take me to what was the genesis of this book, and as you share in your intro what I just said in terms of identifying, or not identifying, but bringing to fore this Black Appalachia, this country life.
Hmm.
What was the genesis and the why as to why this book?
Well, I think that at least in the background, one of my intentions, it shows up in my poetry, it shows up in my fiction. One of my intentions has always been to highlight the Black rural experience,
Hmm.
highlight the Black Appalachian experience. So that's already sort of ingrained in my work. But I think with my previous book was Perfect Black, which is a collection of poems. But even before Perfect Black, the book before that is The Birds of Opulence.
Hmm.
And something happened to me when I was writing The Birds of Opulence, because it's fiction. It's probably the purest fiction that I've ever written. But there's a thread that runs through it that reminds me or spurs from the sort of seed of the idea came from my own personal experience that my mother um, had issues with mental health. She was diagnosed as being a paranoid schizophrenic. So at some point when I was writing that novel, I decided that my poetry self, my fiction self, and my essayist or nonfiction self did not live in separate houses.
Yes.
That they all lived in the same house, in the same mind, in the same heart, in the same body. So when I began to write Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghost, that was already with me, that the storytelling would be multifaceted. The idea came, I had written a lyric essay for Emergence magazine, also called Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghost. And so a lot of people liked that essay and kept saying, is there more? Like, are you going to write more about this? And, it's a long story about how I ended up with my agent in for this book, who is a food writing agent and not, I have a whole other literary agent for my other work. But I think it was all sort of destined, and it all came from two moments. So one moment is long ago when I was in 1994, when my grandmother died, and we all were grieving and we were trying to decide what we were going to do about food for the holidays. And so me and my cousins, my aunts and uncles, decided that everybody would just stay home and be quiet. And we were used to going to Granny and Granddaddy's house and having these huge meals, 30, 40 people. And so it was my task then to stay home with my three children and my mother and to cook. And so it was so daunting that here I was stepping into this role. So I remember, and my grandmother taught me how to cook. So I remember being in the kitchen, actually, same kitchen, it's right over here. And I was in here trying my best to do this, and I was breaking down. And I remembered I had my grandmother's dress. So I went back to the bedroom, brought it out, hung it up on the back door, and just said, and was sobbing, of course, the whole time. And I just said, okay, I need you. Like, how are we gonna do this? Let's do this together. And, and I felt like she was there with me. And so
that is so beautiful.
Yeah, it was so, and it still sort of hits me emotionally. And so then what I did, as a writer with that emotion, was to begin to put it in poems, and I put it in stories, but I never thought that I would face it with the truth head on.
Right.
And so I carried it with me this whole time. And the other moment was I had decided I was going to write some flash essays. A friend of mine wanted to publish them, and I was thinking about structure and how to just break another mold. And I was going to write these vignettes or these flash essays that were like my mother, my grandmother, and Ma Lily, who was my mother's mother. And I decided, oh, well, let me see how far back I can go. And so I discovered Aggie of Color, who's my fourth great grandmother, when I was on a writing retreat in Florida.
Wow.
And I became just obsessed with her and the weight of the legacy of her life. Because, as a professor, as an intellectual, as a Black woman in this country, we know what the legacy of slavery is, but to see it close up and to have it so tethered to me so closely. Aggie of Color. She didn't even have a name. And here I've been all these years. When I got married, I refused to change my name because I am a proud Wilkinson. I am proud Wilkinson. And then to have a documented proof right in my face that she was an enslaved woman. Aggie probably wasn't even her name. Wilkinson certainly wasn't her name. That Wilkinson's owned her. And and just sort of the rush of that. And so I stayed up all night pacing. I finally fell asleep, and I woke up and I heard a voice that said, "My mother calls to me, but not in your language."
Mm.
And I ran out of my door at the Hermitage in Florida, and sun wasn't even up yet, and I'm just walking the beach
Mm.
and sort of communing with her. And then as a writer, I had a decision to make, like, okay, what is this? Is this am I having a moment? uh, an untethered moment? Uh, is this a fictional character?
Mhm.
What is this? And then I had to say to myself, can you do this? Even though I was like boldly saying my fiction self, my poetry self, my nonfiction self
Mhm.
were all one house.
Mhm.
There it was, and with a voice. And I'm thinking, does this work? Can I do this?
Yes.
And then, when she came to me that way and started telling me her story, and then I started doing actual research and archival research about not only our personal story, but what would have been going on in the country during her lifetime,
Mhm.
and sort of traveling with that story all the way to me,
Mhm.
via food,
Mhm.
uh, all the way to me, and then on to my children and grandchildren. It just opened up. And I no longer cared if I could do it or not.
You
I
were gonna
just
do
knew
that.
that I was going to do it.
I love that. Thank you. That's spiritual. And even in the notes that I took, upon reading the book, I actually made a note on how spiritual it felt reading. It felt as if you were presenting these stories and the recipes. It was as if it was ritual. And it was a very spiritual feeling reading, but I got goosebumps when you told the story about bringing your grandmother's dress in the kitchen, and I'm a crybaby, so I'm trying not to cry. I have responsibilities as a host, is to not to cry every time. But that was one of the things that stood out in your book, is when you would talk about being in this kitchen with your grandmother, you would often mention about being in the folds of her dress
Hmm.
and being behind her dress, and how you learned from her by watching. And she would put you to work, but that is how you learn how to cook. It wasn't necessarily these measured and instructions. It was by watching her. And so to hear you speak of this is also, I just want to give you that feedback, that that experience and that feeling that you had was just so palpably felt when reading as well. Like
Hmm.
you transmitted that so eloquently and so powerfully that when I read it, I was absorbed into that scene. And so that just, that means so much that you have these artifacts, these things, these memories that you were able to put in this book, and to really for them to really be absorbed by the reader in the ways that you intended. But I do have in a question about what input did you have when it came to the visual aspect of this book, because it is such a visual book as well, not just the words that you've written, but the feel of it is like a memory book, like a scrapbook.
Hmm.
And it was so interesting. I was like, this book has credits. It's a what it was someone, a food designer, I think. There were so many people involved in the layout of the book. And so I would love to know, what was your what leadership did you have in terms of the visual aspects of the book?
Well, I think it was that too. I feel like was spirit, because what happened, first of all, I was in a world that I know nothing about, right? Wonderfully in a world that I know nothing about,
Right.
because, I'm a fiction writer, I'm a poet. And so working with people who primarily work with food books,
Yeah.
cookbooks and other things, food memoirs, they were speaking a language that I knew nothing about.
Right.
And as a literary writer, I was really hesitant when Francis Lamb, who's brilliant and wonderful, was my editor. He does the Splendid Table, and he's, you know, a really smart food person who also has you know, a heart and a soul and a spirit. And so I was ready to sort of tangle, because I thought, okay, this is my literary self doesn't want people to think this is a cookbook.
Right.
And he said, well, do you want it to be beautiful? I said, yes, I want it to be beautiful.
Yeah.
And just the way the team came together.
Mm.
And usually a cookbook writer is not present when all these photographs are taken. I sort of insisted and then asked gingerly, you know, it just happened to fall on my spring break here.
Mhm.
And so I went up,
Yes.
and then to be there, and it was all Black and brown women,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Black photographer, Black prop stylist. And these women were so careful with my family's legacy
That's
that there
wonderful.
are credits, and it is amazing the care. The prop stylist, who is based in California, I think, kept asking me questions. She kept sending me emails like, you know,
Oh,
oh, send me a
yes.
picture of your grandmother's, you know, I've still got some of my grandmother's cooking utensils. Send me a picture of your grandmother's bowl. Send me a picture of some of the spoons.
Oh,
What do you
wow.
imagine? You know, and then we've got cultural differences, because I'm talking about rural Kentucky, and she's like, so this basket meeting or this homecoming, tell me about that.
Yes.
I didn't even know why she was asking all these questions. I just thought she was curious as she was reading through uh,
Yeah.
the draft of the book. This woman went through antique stores and
Wow.
online and went and rented from prop places all of these things that she saw. It was like being on a set of a movie. Like, she
Yeah, that's what it sounds
really
like.
sort of carefully curated all these items and either brought them with her or had them shipped from California and from all over the country.
Wow.
And so I was just amazed as I would watch this get set up. The chef who was there cooking the food was just absolutely wonderful.
Did you
And
do taste tests?
I did. And we would have, you know, they would say, okay, it's time for the jam cake. And they would make the jam cake, and they would have a
Yes.
whole scene around it, and be very careful with the lighting. And you know, I
Wow.
kept saying, and I took my grandmother's dress there. I took my grandmother's dress, and I took
Wow.
the recipe box. And so it was there. And I kept saying, well, what about my grandmother? Don't forget about my grandmother's dress. And they were like, we got you, sis. But
Mm.
they knew what was going to happen, and of course it did. Like I
Yeah.
didn't, because I thought, well, this is my life. I've lived it. You know, the
Right.
emotion's still there, but I'm fine. But when they put up almost scenes from my childhood, from what I had read, like the way that she lighted it, and she put pieces of wood, or she put I can't even remember what actually ended up in there, but she put up all of these things around my grandmother's dress when she hung it
Hmm.
up, and I just
I know you just let them
down
fall.
crying.
Yes, I can.
And they
Oh my
just
goodness.
surrounded me. And you know, one of the questions that they ask, and you know, of course they're professionals and they do this all the time. And I don't think they don't do this kind of books. And so they kept almost one by one, you know, are you okay? And then the other
Mm.
question was, do you think the ancestors are proud? Did we honor them? Did we honor your people?
Wow.
And you said you were gonna cry, but here I go. But it
Oh
yeah,
my God, that sounds so beautiful. And look what you, and to know that the genesis of this was a message that you got, and you, oh my goodness, that is so
yeah,
powerful. And so now it just became this communal thing.
yes,
So your memories weren't just, because writing can be so solitary. This now became a communal activity,
yes,
bringing all these other people in who weren't experienced in this Black Appalachian experience. So now you have widened the circle for them now to have that. This is just beautiful. And it's like a curation, like a museum curation, the work that goes into curating an experience for visitors. So you created not only the experience for us as readers, but also for those who participated in putting this together. That's fantastic. One of
Yeah.
the,
Oh,
um,
go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say everything's so careful. I just wanted to show you that even the book designer, like I don't know if you can see it on screen, but if you have a copy, you can see it. The the inside covers, the end papers of the book are the lavender that is the same lavender. And I happen to have this from something else, but this is my grandmother's dress, and it's
That's the dress.
the
Wow.
same lavender.
Wow.
So I've never cried so much because every little thing, because she's like, we need to pick the end papers. And I was like, oh gosh, not another thing. And she sent like a little swatch that was yellow. And I was like, okay. And she said, well, and I wanted to show you this one. And she put the lavender up. And before she even explained what it was, I was just like, I knew exactly what it was. And so everything was just so carefully curated. And I believe that the ancestors had a hand in that too.
No question. No question at all. So I like to eat. So I'm gonna get to, of course, to the question about the food that is included. So I learned about ostrich ferns greens,
Fiddle.
known as fiddleheads.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'd never heard that in my life. Chess pie, pine lick mutton leg, um basket meeting, green beans and new just everything just sounded so delicious. And then it was all of them are fantastically tied to these stories. So I wanted to know, just when you even came up with the menu that you would be presenting to us of food choices, were the food choices first, or did you have the stories and thinking about these memories, you were thinking of the meals that were included in these memories? What came first?
Well, I had written a proposal, and I had thought about the stories that I wanted to tell first, and then try to decide, well, what foods appear in these stories. Um, so there were lots of things that didn't make the cut. Like there are
Okay.
lots of food that didn't make the cut, but I also wanted the food to travel, right? So there's food in there that either is of Aggie, the early 1800s,
Mhm.
or stemmed from that.
Mm,
Um, Foods that could be connected to Africa. For example, chicken and dumplings are very southern, a very sort of country rural food and very Appalachian, but the idea of taking what meat you have and putting some starch with it
yes,
is a very African concept
yes.
with the
And
food.
we've seen that in every variation, Caribbean variation possible. So you're
Oh yeah,
exactly right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted to pick foods that travel that way. And then as things come up, me and my husband and I used to own a bookstore and a cafe. So I
Oh,
wanted to
wow.
include some of those things. And then there's a connection. Like my husband never had a chance to meet my grandfather, but my grandfather was a farmer and slaughtered pigs. And then my husband used to make a pulled pork at the cafe that we had. And so, there's that travel, that continuum of these
Yes.
foods. And I wanted to create that sort of, for example, my grandfather made sorghum molasses, which is a kind of rich syrup. And so at the bookstore, we used to have a sorghum latte.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's taking that old tradition and moving it through. And so I talk a little bit about the history of sorghum in the mountains and why that was the sweetener, and we didn't have the kind of enslavement that was based around sugar the way that it was in the deep south, and sugar
Right.
was sort of rare in
Right.
some areas in the mountains, so they would use the sorghum that they made for out of the sorghum, the stalk, they would make that to sweeten.
Right.
And so each of the things that I chose are not just good eating.
Right.
Although they are.
Even though they are, and the pictures they just make you hungry. That's fantastic. So I definitely enjoyed this book, and I could totally see it adapted. We're seeing a lot of adaptations on television now around these cultural practices. The first adaptation that comes to mind is Black Cake, and it's a whole story, but it's central. What is central is this Black Cake, which is a cake, very popular, Caribbean, Jamaica in particular. I definitely could see some type of adaptation of this book into television. Is that something that you're interested in, something that you've been in talks about? And even not necessarily as a work of fiction or in that way, but as something that could be focused on you talking about the things that are in the book. Have you been in talks about that?
I have not been in talks with that. Oprah, Ava.
From your mouth to their ears. So we're putting it out there.
No, I would love that. And not just for selfish reasons, but because of what we spoke about earlier. I think it's an opportunity. I've been in talks in the past about putting my other works, on television as a series or as a film, and they never quite came into fruition. And one of the reasons why it was disappointing, not just because personally, of course, we want
Right.
it.
Of course.
But I think the other sort of missed opportunity is to sort of educate again this idea that there are, because people tell me every time, and people are telling me already on this book tour, which just started, like, I didn't know there were Black people in the mountains. I was like, yeah, my family was there for more than 200 years. Like,
Yeah.
yes,
Yep.
there are, we are everywhere.
Right. Exactly.
I think it's an opportunity to tell that story about Black people in the hills.
That's fantastic. So, tell folks where they can get your book, where you would like to have them if they were indecisive as to where to purchase it, where they can get their book, and where they can reach you online.
Yeah, I am Crystal Wilkie, almost across. Don't look at my TikTok, but almost across social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, and my website is crystalewilkinson.net. And so, where you can get Praisesong for the Kitchen Ghost, I would like to see you go to Ida's or Harriet's, and you can either order from them directly, or you can go to bookshop.org and put in that you want to order from Harriet's or Ida's.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I'm so glad we finally got an opportunity to see each other and to be in conversation. I hope it's only the beginning and not the end. And best of luck on this fantastic book. It's such a beautiful book, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So welcome.